Welcome to the channel, folks. My name's Shane. In today's video, I've got my hands on the brand new Panasonic GH5II. Anytime I purchase a new camera, I like to do my first impressions video. This literally arrived today, so I'm gonna go out here in the park and we're gonna test it out, try the autofocus. We're gonna compare it up against the GH5 and Panasonic S5 in terms of autofocus performance, color science, and overall look and all that kind of thing as well. So I can't wait to compare this to the other cameras. And yeah, I'm wrapped. I got my hands on one so early, so I paid full price for this. Again, I'm not an ambassador, so if this video is helpful or if you enjoy it, please leave a thumbs up. I appreciate that. Let's get into the park. Now, odds are if you're watching this video, you've already binge watched a lot of videos on the GH5 MKII and also heard about the upcoming GH6, which I'm really looking forward to as well. Now, one of the things I said on my podcast about this camera before anyone got their hands on it was I predicted this would be a Panasonic S5 in the body of a GH5. And it is. Basically everything that's in my Panasonic S5 is in this, with the exception, of course, of Vlog Full. You get Vlog L in this, but what I'm shooting in now is Cine V2, which I think looks pretty great. And I'm using face detection tracking on this 12mm f1.4 prime. I think it's doing a pretty great job. Let me know in the comments whether or not it's working. While there's a whole lot of new autofocus features on this camera, one of the things that I noticed that made me smile was Panasonic, from default, as soon as you turn the camera on, opt to use one area mode, which has been my favorite mode to use on these cameras for a long time. But the Panasonic S5 made face detection so good that I have a feeling now if this is on par or better, it's going to be really good in terms of face detection autofocus. The S5 is far better than the GH5 and GH5S in terms of autofocus performance. And from what I can see, even with this prime lens, it looks like it's working pretty well. So if this is working well, let me know in the comments. And if there's a whole lot of weird pulsing and all that kind of stuff going on in the background, I'm sure I'll hear about it in the comments section, so feel free, go for it. Up next, we're doing a video comparison and color science comparison between the Panasonic GH5 MKII and the Panasonic S5. So there's going to be a difference in the framing. When I shoot in 4K 50p on the Panasonic S5, it crops into APS-C, whereas everything that you saw before will look exactly the same on the Panasonic GH5 MKII. So this is the 12mm lens, and this is the 20mm in APS-C crop mode. So this is as wide as it will go. This is the best I can do in terms of a comparison, and I already know that this lens should be blowing this lens away, but how's the roll off on my skin from the sun, or what little we have of it today on this overcast day? It's just starting to rain as well, so it's also worth mentioning that the GH5II body is also weather sealed as well, but this lens isn't. So I'm going to switch over to the kit lens so it doesn't get too wet in just a moment, but this is how they both compare with all the white balance settings set exactly the same. And now to keep hopefully things more similar in terms of the framing, I'm over to the kit lens. This is the 12-60 f3.5 to 5.6 kit lens on the GH5 MKII and the kit lens 20-60mm on the Panasonic S5. So if you plan on buying a GH5II, you can still get it with this kit lens. I think this isn't a bad kit lens, all things considered. The weather sealing is great. You're not going to get a ton of background separation, but what you do get with this lens is far better autofocus performance. It works really well. This lens recently had an update as well, making it far better for autofocus in the slower frame rates. Now, I'm going to do both of these cameras the best favor by shooting in the higher frame rates, and you can see which one works the best and whether or not it's now usable. This face tracking looks, at least to me, like it's doing a good job. And if anything weird's going on back there, I'll leave some annotations on screen, or it should be pretty obvious. But overall, so far so good. How do they compare in terms of color science? I can see a difference on the LED screens, but whether that translates when I get them into my project is a whole other thing. One of the big improvements on the GH5II over that of the S5 and also the GH5 and so forth is the ability to turn the audio preamps down to -18 dB instead of just the regular -12. So if you found certain microphones or wireless packs to be a little bit too hot for the preamps, odds are right now they should work fine. One of the things that sort of tipped me over the edge with the GH5II and why I wanted to test it out was its IBIS system. It looked like it was a far better IBIS system than the old GH5 and the S5. One of the things that underwhelmed me about the S5 was its IBIS system. It's okay, but it's not great. And there's not a lot of lenses, if any, that support, optical stabilization mixed with the IBIS system. And I found that I was always going back to the GH5 or the Olympus for any time I wanted to do handheld stuff. And for vlogging, we may now have a winner with this GH5 Mark II. The IBIS system is awesome. Let's take a look. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos on the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, you know that's got one of the best stabilization systems out there. And I think this might actually be better. I'm just holding it like this in my hand. There's no tripod or anything right now. And odds are this is looking really, really smooth. I did a quick test of this at home just in dry conditions and it worked a treat. So one of the reasons why I want to go back to Micro Four Thirds is, not that I ever really left it, but instead of the S5, is for this kind of buttery smooth stabilization. It works a treat. And now we're over to the Panasonic GH5, the original one. So how's this in terms of stabilization? Odds are it's still pretty great. This is one of the things that a lot of people love about the GH5, including myself, is just how great the in-body image stabilization is. Now, this is mostly important for me when I'm behind the camera, but occasionally when I like to do this kind of stuff, it's great to know that the camera can handle the shakes without doing a whole lot of post-production. Anything to save time is good. How does the color science compare in this particular test? I guess I'll maybe do a split screen here so you can see the difference. This is Cine V. It doesn't have the Cine V2. I love Cine V on this camera. It's one of my favorite straight out of camera profiles. Some people find it a little bit too contrasty, but for just quick web content, it works a treat. And now we're over to the Panasonic S5. It's really starting to rain now, so this will be my last outdoor test before I go review the footage and then also give you my thoughts about what I'm seeing on screen and then talk a little bit about the results. So this is a vlogging test. Now we are in the crop sensor mode right now. I'm going to switch it back to full so you can see what it will do without this crop. And now you're looking at the Panasonic S5 in full frame mode in 25 frames per second in face detection autofocus in Cine V2. So this is how that looks. How's the stabilization now without that crop? Is it better? Is it worse? I don't think this will be as good just from my testing. And I can see on the screen there might be some weird stuff going on in the corners. That's usually pretty expected. You know, the bigger the sensor, sometimes, not always, and the wider the lens, the more weird stuff can happen. But yeah, I mean, it's totally usable for vlogging if you've got a really steady hand. And now that I'm back home out of the rain, I'm going to give you my first impressions of the Panasonic GH5 Mark II. In terms of image quality, stabilization, and color science, it gets the big thumbs up. I much prefer the color science on the new GH5 Mark II over the original, which had a very heavy green tint. Now, I don't like it as much still as the GH5S, which has a much sort of more red sort of look to it, but I think it looks more pleasing. So it's up to you. That's all subjective stuff. You can like one or the other, and adjusting the colors in camera on a GH5 isn't hard either via the white balance tool. So you can adjust that manually and sort of angle it towards whatever color you like. But overall, just straight out of camera colors on this look really great. The stabilizer on the GH5 Mark II is on par with the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II, except you get far more codecs, better image quality, without that great autofocus that this has. This has phase detection autofocus, whereas the GH5 Mark II still has the contrast detection autofocus. But talking about that, it's gotten far better. I think the star of the show in terms of face detection autofocus has to be the Panasonic S5. I think it outperformed the GH5 Mark II with the lenses that I used on the day. So I used this 12mm f1.4 prime, which doesn't do the camera any favors for autofocus, and it did a great job, but I did notice it was still pulsing a little bit behind me, even though I was in sharp focus, and it very rarely lost me. So overall, I'm going to give the autofocus performance a thumbs up. For Panasonic standards, it's not as good as the Olympus or Sony or any of these other brands, but it worked far better on this camera than it's ever worked on any of the other Panasonic cameras in the lineup that I have. Now, when I got over to this kit lens, this 12-60 kit lens, it worked really well. It worked on par with the S5. So I think with the right lens, you're going to get some great results. And this combination, this 12-60 kit lens on the GH5 Mark II is a far smaller option than the kit lens on the S5. So there are always going to be some trade-offs, and it's up to you which one is right for your particular situation. If you want to shoot a lot in low light and you want stabilization that's okay, the S5 will do that, but the stabilization on the Mark II kills the S5. The vlogging test, it wasn't even close. For owners of a GH5 who might be wondering, hey, is it finally time to upgrade to a GH5 Mark II, or should I wait for the GH6? You know what? If you're desperate for a camera now, I could say this would be a pretty good option if you need 4K 60 in 10-bit. It's great to also be able to see all my video thumbnails on my Mac in 10-bit 422 versus 420 on the GH5, which come up blank. So yeah, there's that going for it as well. I think that's a really great file management tool. The extra codecs and also all the anamorphic modes, if you use them, will appeal to a lot of people with the GH5 Mark II. But the GH5 has most of what this has. I think it's just slightly improved color science, far better autofocus, and better stabilization with an IS boost that doesn't lock when you turn. This just works a lot better in, you know, when you're behind the camera. So that's my first impressions. I'm gonna do a full review of this coming up. Let me know what you think of this video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you soon. See ya.